Hi, I'm Mattioli, and welcome to another reading of Boston Accent. Boston Accent is available on Amazon.com, and it contains mature subject matter. We're going to pick up where we left off. Chuck boarded a bus to Reno Airport that Friday and flew back to Boston. After Rick had seen him off, he stopped by my house. We're kicking back, smoking a joint and having a beer when Rick asks me about Phil. I tell him he's still down in Sacramento and I've not seen him since I left there. Rick comes up with the idea that we should drive the 100 miles down the mountain and surprise him with a visit. I ask him how we're going to get there, even though I think I know the answer. The stolen car. I ask him how much longer he's going to drive around in it, and he promises that this will be the last time. When we get back, he'll take the plates and VIN numbers off it and leave it in a casino parking lot. I'm thinking this is really dumb, but against my better judgment, I agree to go. I grab my wallet, beers for the ride, plus a joint to smoke with Phil, and off we go. As I walk out to the car, I see Rick is sitting in the passenger seat. What are you doing? I ask him, once again, knowing the answer before he tells me. Do you mind driving? The float in the carburetor is broken, and the car being a stick shift makes it a bitch to drive. I walk around the back of the car without answering him, and I notice on the back of the car a bumper sticker that reads, I shot JR. Under different circumstances, that might be funny, but right now I was having second thoughts about driving this car any further than the end of the street. What I quickly learned is that until you get the car up to speed and into fourth gear, the car most closely resembles a bucking bronco. We're driving out of town, headed for the mountain pass that leads to Sacramento, and every time my light turns red, I cringe. I'm driving a stolen car, and every person around is staring at the car because of the way it's bucking as I accelerate. What's wrong with this picture? I say out loud, and Rick ignores me as he takes a pull off his beer. That's right, I'm thinking. You may as well drink openly in public while I'm driving. That's going to be minor compared to the fact I'm driving a stolen car. Oh, yes, and I have weed on me. This is awesome. Once we get out of town and out on the highway, we are fine. When we arrive in Sacramento, Phil's house is less than a mile off the ramp. Phil is actually sleeping when we get there, having worked the night shift hours earlier, but we wake him up and he seems glad to see us. We party with him for a few hours, and he tells us he has to head to work. We bid farewell, and good luck to Phil, who promises to come up and see us soon. Soon turned out to be the following week, and Phil spends the night in my house. The next morning, the two of us are sitting on the floor of my bedroom smoking a wake-up joint when the house starts shaking. We both stare at each other, and at the same time yell, "Earthquake." We jump up, and run out of the house with my roommates right behind us. We end up in the middle of the road, and all our neighbors are standing in the street as well. I'm staring down the road, and I can see the rise and fall of the pavement for just seconds, and then it's over. The quake came in at 5.0, with its epicenter being 20 miles away from us. It was big enough for us, and it was significant in that it was our first quake. I got an author's note here. While writing this earthquake segment, an earthquake rocked my residence. It was like I made it happen. It was a truly bizarre experience. I'm writing about an earthquake, and an earthquake hit the house. It's not like I live in L.A. I was in Vermont at the Canadian border, and my chair and my desk went across the floor while I was writing about an earthquake. It could only happen to me. I have to be careful next time I write about natural disasters. Okay, Phil returned home to Sacramento, and the next day, Rick showed up at the house with Dina, big as a house, and his daughter, Mary Lou. Rick took them out to the tent after a visit with me, and one night was enough for Dina. She made Rick rent a room at a local motel, which is where they stayed the rest of their time in Tahoe. 3 weeks after Dina arrived, she gave birth to a baby boy they named Thor. When Dina went to labor, Rick was in a biker bar around the corner shooting pool and tripping on mushrooms. A tenant next door ran to the bar to get Rick, and off they went to the hospital. Dina was so mad that Rick was tripping that she gave him an ultimatum to straighten up his act. A week after Thor was born, Rick stopped by the house to say goodbye and show me his new son. Rick, at Dina's request, had decided to return to Massachusetts to be closer to the families. It would be several years before I would see them again in Massachusetts. As Massachusetts turned to Florida, where Rick continued to party and ended up getting arrested driving a stolen car. He did 2 years in prison, and when he got out, he joined AA, quit drinking, drugging, and never fell off the wagon. Soon after going straight, they had a third child and moved back to Massachusetts. One day I was leaving work out of the back entrance, and as I cut through the parking lot, I saw a car I recognized in the far corner. I walked around the back of the car to verify, and there on the bumper was, "I shot JR." That car sat there for a month. Till this day, I can't look at Larry Hagman without thinking of that car. Frank and I both put in for the week of the 4th of July off. I had been a Jimi Hendrix fan since I was 12 years old, and I talked to Frank about visiting his grave outside of Seattle, Washington. Frank had wanted to see the Pacific coastline and the Redwood Forest, so we decided to make a week out of it. If we had the time, we would cross the Puget Sound by ferry. Frank was driving a 74 Ford Maverick that he had driven out from Michigan. It was the car I had made famous the evening I jumped in the wrong Maverick. The car wasn't pretty, but it was dependable. We head northwest on back roads with the intention of finding the coastline highway. Driving at this angle, we're looking at a 250 to 300 mile ride before we see ocean. The route we chose was a mountain road with very little traffic, and once it got dark, we saw even less cars. Not long after it got dark, Frank began to yawn and remarked that he was beat. I volunteered to drive, and Frank crawled into the back seat to try and sleep. It wasn't long before I could hear Frank snoring, and I started to yawn. I made up my mind that I wasn't going to stop for the night until we got to the ocean. I needed something to keep me awake, and I decided to put on some tunes and listen to them loud enough to hear, but not so loud as to wake Frank. Frank had a decent variety of cassettes in his glove box, so I leaned over to the passenger side to fish one out. I avoided turning on the interior light, and I was trying to read the tapes from the light of the instrument panel when I looked up and we were on the other side of the road heading into the woods. I dropped the tape and yanked the wheel so hard that I thought the car was going to roll. I had overcorrected, and once on the right side of the road, I had to pull on the wheel again to keep us out of the woods. During this whole process, the tires were squealing, everything came out of the glove box, and Frank rolled off the seat onto the floor. "What happened?" Frank said from the floor with surprise, concern, and a little bit of fear in his voice. "Fucking deer ran out in front of me. I had to swerve to avoid it, or it was coming through the windshield," I said, sounding so convincing that even I believed it. Frank climbed back on the seat and was snoring again in 2 minutes. I had a feeling he wouldn't even remember this incident with all that he had drank and smoked. I ended up listening to the tape that was in the deck. Within an hour, we hit the coastline highway. I continued to drive into Oregon, and when I saw a sign that said beach, I took that exit. I entered the beach parking lot, which is empty, and parked in the far corner away from the entrance. As I shut the car off, Frank sat up in the back seat and groaned. "Where are we?" "Coos Bay, Oregon," I tell him, feeling really good about having driven so far. "Oregon? No shit. Wow, you drove a long way," Frank said, really surprised at my progress. We decided to get out of the car, stretch our legs, and pee, which I had been holding way too long. After relieving ourselves, we found a level spot in the sand, laid out a blanket, and went to sleep. It was just after 3 a.m. when we got to the beach, and when I opened my eyes to daylight, around 10 a.m., it was to the sound of voices. I sat up and looked around, trying to get my bearings, and I came face to face with a family of 8 that had set up camp not 20 feet away. The parents were staring at me and seemed amused by my "where the hell are we" look on my face. I nodded good morning, and they returned my greeting. Frank woke hearing my voice and sat up with the same confused look on his face that I must have had. We took a time out to take in a view of the Oregon coast and took some pictures before heading out. We still had a lot of road to cover and a lot to see. We stopped at the first little town we came to and picked up some pre-made breakfast sandwiches. We nuked and ate them before they had a chance to cool down, burning the roof of our mouths. We didn't care. We were starving. Well, in the store, I spotted some tourist pamphlets and grabbed a couple of those along with a local paper. The paper mentioned there would be a fireworks at a stadium in Eugene that night. And Frank and I both agreed that we should go check them out. In the meantime, one of the pamphlets showed Oregon caves not far from us, so we decided to head there for the day. The caves were farther away than I thought, and we arrived roughly 2.5 hours later. It was definitely worth the ride, we quickly found out, as we made our way below ground with the help of a guide. I wouldn't say I'm a full-blown claustrophobic, but there were some tight squeezes that messed with my mind. On top of the narrow passages, there was one area that was filled with bats. I will have to admit to having a fear of being bit by the #1 carrier of rabies in North America, and there were hundreds of bats down there. The caves are fun and informative, and we both enjoyed them very much. Back on the road again, we decided to head right to the stadium and spend the rest of the day in the general area while we waited for nightfall and the fireworks. We ended up parking right in the stadium parking lot and decided it would be a good idea to catch some sleep so we could continue to head north after the fireworks rather than spending the night here. The fireworks were good, and a lot of people showed up, pretty much filling the stadium. Afterwards, we continued our drive towards Seattle, where we took turns driving most of the night. Sometime around dawn, I found a place to park to stop so I could grab a couple hours sleep. Later that day, we came to the site of Mount St. Helens and made an attempt to drive as close to it as possible, but we were turned back by park rangers that informed us there was a 10-mile red zone around the crater. We were able to get out of the car and check out the incredible damage done by the volcano. There wasn't one tree standing as we faced the former summit of the mountain, which was now shaved off flat. Thousands of trees lay on the ground like matchsticks, having been leveled by the blast. It was clear to see that nothing could have lived through this. After leaving the volcano, we headed on to Hendrix's grave. Jimi is buried in the town of Renton with a modest stone flat in the ground with a guitar etched into it. Frank and I were the only ones there and sat by his grave and reflected on how much he did in his short life. We then tipped our caps to Jimi and headed down to the Seattle waterfront. At the waterfront, we bought some clothes and some lunch and then had a meeting of the minds, where we came to the conclusion that we had traveled far enough and decided to head back to Tahoe. We did take our time and tried to travel a different route whenever possible. One of these routes took us through the redwood forests, which are amazing. The trees are so massive that they block out the sun, and it's like nighttime when you're in there. After that, we spent time on the beaches on the Oregon coast as well as Northern California. We ended up taking the coast road quite a ways down before heading inland to Sacramento and eventually home to Tahoe. All in all, it was a great trip in which we saw a lot of beautiful country, and we made it home safe. And we're going to call it quits for today with that one. We're out of time, and I can see that this next segment is a big. Okay. I'm Mark Mattioli, and we're reading Boston Accent. And Boston Accent is available on Amazon.com. And tomorrow we got a leap year special for X amount of hours tomorrow. I'm not going to commit to when it starts and when it ends, but sometime tomorrow I'm going to have the book on sale for cheap money, $6 something. It's going to be a total cost of $10 with the shipping, and that's just for leap year. So if you haven't bought the book, if you got moths eating out your pockets, if you're a fucking cheap motherfucker, this is your chance to get the book. This is as low as it's going to get, and it's almost gone in paper book. There's only a handful left of copies, and that's it. It's going to be gone and available on Kindle only after that. All right. You've been pre-warned. Talk to you soon. Ciao.